Okay, so everyone should see my screen again. So our next session is 5 things we wish we knew before we migrated. And our presenter is Rebecca Shotif, who is the Discovery and Integrated Systems Librarian at Grinnell College. She received her BA from Oberlin and her MLS from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Her scholarly interests are varied, ranging from metadata to collections management to digitized resources to pedagogy. So with that, we will switch things over so that Rebecca can present.
All right, let me share my screen. And let's see. I want this one. And everyone can see the one without my notes on it?
Yes, we can see it.
Good. All right, so as mentioned, I'm Rebecca Shotif. I'm the systems librarian at Grinnell College, and I was the project lead for Grinnell College's migration from III Sierra and then Viewfind to Ex Libris Alma and Primo VE. Since most of you are probably from New York, I'll give you a quick summary of Grinnell College. So Grinnell is in Grinnell, Iowa, an hour or more away from anything exciting. And exciting is very different in Iowa than it is in Chicago, where I was from before. But that's besides the point. Grinnell College is a highly selective liberal arts college with about 1,600 students. We have a main library and a branch science library, which are very tightly knit together, basically the same library, just in 2 separate locations. The Grinnell College Library signed their contract with Ex Libris in December of 2016. And then we started our Alma Primo implementation in January of 2018. And we went live June 28th, 2018. So we've been on Alma about 7 months now. So the wound is a lot fresher for me than it is for Janice probably at the moment. And I'm here to tell you about what we wish we knew before we migrated. The first thing I wish we knew before migrating was that the old system has way more idiosyncrasies than you realize. So Grinnell College Libraries have been on an Innovative Interfaces Inc. product since 1989. We started with InnoPack and then had Millennium and then Sierra. And rumor has it that the Sierra upgrade was quite the challenge. So I was then horrified that we had to migrate to a completely different system because I was like, oh, if that was a challenge, I'm going to die. I did not. I'm still here. But anyway, we signed the contract with Ex Libris in December of 2016. So we thought we had plenty of time for cleanup before our migration in 2018. But oh, were we wrong. As we started identifying cleanup projects, we started finding more and more and more and more things to clean up. So for example, one of the easiest things to clean up was the vendor records. And that was a big challenge, even though it should have been really easy. We had almost 30 years of vendors in there, not all of whom we still used. So it looked like that'd be an easy fix. You just ask the acquisitions people, what vendors are we still using and which ones are we not? And yeah, the acquisitions people were like, here you go. But then when we would go into Sierra to try and clean those out, we found that these defunct vendors were still attached to order records. And in Sierra, you cannot, under the pain of death, or rather the system just being irreparably damaged, delete any codes, vendor or otherwise, if they're still in use somewhere in the system. So we had to go find every single order record and figure out, how to clean that up or how to change that vendor code in there. So we could still have the order record, but that we could clean out the vendor record so we weren't sending defunct vendors into Alma when we migrated. This, idiosyncrasy of Sierras with the codes made location codes unbelievably difficult as well. So we, know that we didn't want, a certain location code anymore. And so we created a list in Sierra to try and find everything with that location code, and we change it. And then we do another search just to make sure that we've cleaned everything out. And then all of a sudden these ghost records start appearing. And then you're like, oh no, what are we doing? We have to clean those out too. So we, did this process over and over, making sure that we had cleaned everything out so that we could delete the location code. And then the Sierra would, give you a warning like, are you sure you want to do this? If it's anywhere else in the system, for deleting, you could explode the system. It doesn't say that exactly, but something of the effect, or maybe what made us feel like that. And that was frightening, and I'm sure we got a few gray hairs from being like, okay, we're going to pull the trigger and get rid of that location code. Another idiosyncrasy of our system is that we have tons of Sierra had tons of dummy records. We had two primary reasons for those dummy records. The first one was that our catalogers had created dummy serials in order to test Sierra's functionality, several years prior, probably when they upgraded. And the nature of libraries now is that we're always on to the next project. So, the catalogers created those dummy records, tested something, and then moved on to the next project and forgot that those dummy records still existed. So the system staff found those dummy records, and they were easy enough to clean out, technically, but we did have to convince the catalogers who, when we reminded them, oh, these are here, they're like, that's really useful. Maybe I'll want to use those. We're like, no, you haven't touched them in years. We had to convince them that they didn't need them anymore. And so then we could clean out those dummy records. The second reason for the dummy records was due to ordering electronic resources. Our instance of Sierra just had not, we hadn't used it perhaps the way, migration from Sierra to Alma would have preferred. So due to the way we had our Sierra set up, when we ordered electronic collections or packages, we didn't have an easy way to link all the records to a collection record, which would then be linked to an order record. So we created dummy bib records for the collection in order to have something to link to that order record. We wanted to clean those out, but we couldn't because we still had to pay on those order records, which needed a bib record to exist. So it was all of us just holding our breath, hoping that we could fiscal close early enough before the data extracts into from Sierra into Alma, so we could, clean those out, and we wouldn't have old data or weird data in Alma instead. And we did make it, so that's a happy story. Another big bucket that needed to get cleaned out was our duplication. So we had, limitations in our Sierra with e-resources. So we had also purchased ProQuest's serials solutions to manage our electronic resources. But the way we had set things up, electronic resources even a decade ago were new. And so libraries just didn't know really how to use them or how to, catalog them. They were non-existent books was basically what it looked like. So we had duplication. We had some stuff that was in Sierra only. We had some stuff that was in serial solutions only. And then we had some stuff that was in both Sierra and serial solutions. And we didn't want to have duplicates in Alma, so we had to clean out the duplicates in Sierra without cleaning out the non-duplicates that were in Sierra. So we had a really convoluted process of deduping and making sure that we were sending everything, but not sending anything twice. So yes, that cleanup due to the idiosyncrasies of both the ILS and then the library human system have a lot of idiosyncrasies and make it difficult to clean up sometimes. The second thing we wish we knew before migration was that data mapping is way more challenging than you expect. So in grad school, I crosswalked metadata by hand in order to understand how that works, and then did it by did XSLT, and I didn't think anything could be harder than that. And then I was given these data mapping forms. These take so much time. We had so many meetings to try to, 1, understand these forms, and 2, fill them out, and 3, fill them out again once we understood more, because we had been reading or we'd been talking to the ex-Libris implementation team. And then we're like, oh no, we misunderstood that, or we have to go fix this. So these forms are the configuration form, and that is hours of deciding how your current policies could be configured in ALMA, so like circulation policies, things like that. The migration form was deciding what to name things. So, what do we name the libraries? That's not something that was in Sierra. The locations, we could actually rename locations if we wanted, and that was a great opportunity. Then there's item statuses, the user groups, etc. What do we want to name them? The field mapping form is deciding how to map all those miscellaneous fields from Sierra into notes fields in ALMA, and then to make sure that your field names from Sierra match up with the standard and expected field names. So for example, in Sierra, the default field name might be like primary ID, and then we had back probably in 1989 switched it to Grinnell College ID instead. So we had to make sure that that matched up with the field mapping form. Then the validation tool takes your data extracts and matches them against your field mapping form. And this one was super exciting because we would quadruple check our data extracts, make sure that there weren't any padding spaces. We could, check them against the field mapping form manually, and sometimes that validation tool would still not validate. And we'd even send them to Xlibris, and Xlibris would be like, no, your data extracts will work. They look fine. I don't know why the validation tool wasn't working. So we were always like, oh, well, we hope that really did work and we didn't miss a padding space or something. And then finally, there was the P to E, which is the bane of the systems team's existence. The migration process brings everything in as print, and then a process is run using the P to E form to turn records into electronic resource records. As noted in the last slide, we had two systems, Sierra and then Serial solutions, and there was duplication between them. So trying to make sure nothing was duplicated, but that all e-resources were listed into the P to E, made us all nervous. The third thing we wish we knew before we migrated was that the implementation was not what we were expecting. We migrated to ALMA in order to better collaborate with the other academic institutions in Iowa who'd already moved to ALMA. And when we were talking with them and they were trying to sell us on migrating to ALMA and Primo, they assured us up and down, or some of them assured us up and down, that this was an easy migration. In hindsight, I don't know what they were talking about. Implementing ALMA was not easy in the slightest. There was no part of the process that was like, wow, that was easy. Just, piece of cake. So we were not necessarily expecting it to be as challenging because we were told it wasn't. We had also hoped to document the process of migrating in hopes to help other libraries with their migration. And a bit more selfishly, we wanted to also present on our migration. So we thought we would document the process. What did we do? What does it mean? Blah, blah, blah. But unfortunately, the migration took minimum of 30 hours, maximum of like 50 hours a week per person on the implementation team. And then we had our day jobs to keep up with. So like, for example, I had 40 hours of ALMA migration, and then I had to also teach classes. Or, my staff might have to, do 40 hours of ALMA migration and then do hardware support. So it was really hard to keep up with everything, and we just didn't have time to document. And then this was probably a little naive. We thought that we'd have a lot more hand-holding during the process than we received. And it was naive because, we realized, Xlibris's implementation teams are running multiple migrations at once, and so they can't spend all their time with you like maybe we wanted. So we found out that we had to do a ton of heavy lifting in the migration. We had to research pretty much anything we wanted to do because ALMA has different lingo than Sierra did. So we have to first understand what the jargon was and then try and figure out how that applied to us. And we had to do a lot of the configurations ourselves. That does make sense because, in theory, and we should know more about our library than Xlibris does. Unfortunately, Xlibris knows more about ALMA than we did when we were migrating. And because we were doing all this researching and then configuring ourselves, we did kind of get out of sync with our implementation team. I'm sure that the implementation team on Ex Libris' side. So Ex Libris was probably a bit baffled and miffed that the second they turned our backs on us, we were like, woohoo, we're going to go, smash hammers against things and fix it. So it was not so much hand-holding and much more, rogue librarians and rogue library staff hacking at it. The fourth item is probably the most important lesson that I learned, at least, while we migrated. So that is, it's really, 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 really hard to migrate as a small institution. To illustrate the point, here's an anecdote. So I am at ILUNA 2018 in Spokane, Washington, and at one of the lunches, I'm eating their catered sandwich, and another librarian comes and sits down with me. And, like you do at conferences, you kind of covertly read their badge, and this librarian was from Harvard. And I knew that Harvard was migrating at the same time as us, so I asked them how their migration process was going. And, we had the polite chat about that, and then they asked how many people were on the implementation team on my side. And I said there were 5, and that librarian seemed a little dissatisfied with that answer. And then they asked how many staff we had, and I said we had about 25 FTE. And then Harvard told me that they had 30 people at ILUNA, all of whom were working on the implementation in some way. And then I was like, oh, this is why it's so hard for us. So Harvard had to fill out the same forms and do all the same data extracts and the same configurations that we did, but they had 30 people working on it. We had 5 people on our implementation team and couldn't really afford to have more people on that team because we had to keep the rest of the library open. And so that meant all that work that, larger institutions can put lots of people, that can put 30 people in some way, and they could divide out the work, was done by 5 people at Grinnell College. So that made this migration probably more stressful than they need to be, and that's probably why other institutions in Iowa were like, it's not that bad. But it's tough to do it with 5 people only. So my recommendation is to spread the love around as much as you can and get as many people to help you as possible, just so that your systems people can take a breather. And then the migration is just not so stressful. The final thing we wish we knew before we migrated was that we learned that Alma's workflows weren't what we were expecting. And I guess there's a presentation about this later today that I will be watching, I guess, because I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. But anyway, when we heard Alma had workflows, we thought the system would take an item through an entire process, receiving, cataloging, processing, and marked as ready for shelf, and that Alma would blatantly notify certain users that they had a task to do. The workflows, as it turned out, were not really that, or not that entirely. So the workflows are really just, as we have them set up now at least, are just a label for something that happens outside the system. So a work order will be placed for an item to be recatalogued in the system, and that triggers that workflow. But then everyone involved in moving the book has to remember to check their tasks lists, which is pictured over there on the left. And so there's no real notification besides that, and then route it to cataloging. And since the system doesn't communicate to cataloging why the item needs to be recatalogued, there has to be some communication outside of the system as to why the work order is placed. So for workflows, my great desire for workflows was to be able to get rid of the myriad of flags that we put in books. These flags have information like where the book's going, like is it going to binding or is it going to acquisitions. They can also have information on how to catalog it, like its call number should be alphabetic and not LC. The flags can also have gift and book plate information, and I'm of the opinion that these flags kill trees and create more and more chaos, and I was really hoping that Alma could solve that out of the box, but it didn't. I think this is going to just have to be something that we revisit again in probably 6 months or a year's time to see, like, hey, maybe now that we understand the system better, we can configure this better for us. So with our workflows, we still have to do similar processes to what we used to do, but now Alma gives it a name and puts it on our task list. And so those were the 5 things that we wish we knew before we migrated. One was that the old system will have lots of idiosyncrasies. Another is data mapping is harder than you expect. Implementation is also not what you're expecting. It is hard to migrate at a small institution, and certain aspects of ALMA don't work like you thought they would when you started migration. Overall, I think that ALMA was a good choice for us, but that doesn't mean that the migration wasn't a big challenge. And now that we're 7 months out, things are getting smoother sailing, and we're also able to go back and look at things that we set up during the migration that we now might want to change or revisit. And so that is the end of my presentation, and I will open it up for questions now.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. We have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. So I'll do the comments first because those are just really short. Carmen and Lauren both kind of, Carmen said, thank you for, Rebecca, thank you for making this point. We're also small and found it really difficult to do everything with a small staff. Yeah. And Lauren said, agreed, if you're small, same workload, fewer people. And as someone who's currently in a small library and going to a slightly larger but still small library, yeah, it's, it's a fun challenge in and of itself, I think, to do that. It sounds like you had a interesting experience with that migration. So we had a couple of questions. Sarah wanted to know, why were you worried about migrating the dummy records? Was it just to migrate all the clean data, Yeah,
that's basically it. We just wanted to migrate, clean data. We didn't want to send in stuff that we didn't need. We were of the opinion that, the cleaner and fewer records that we had, the better it would be. And then, we could make dummy records new in ALMA if we really wanted to. But yeah, it was just for clean data.
Okay. Ingrid wanted to know, could you elaborate again about the dummy records? Could you elaborate on how the dummy orders records for e-resources were migrated into ALMA?
So we were actually able to clean them out. We were holding our breaths because we just had a really short time because we bumped up fiscal close. And so we had a really short time between fiscal close and when we had to do the data extracts to then port into ALMA. So we were able to clean them out. It was just like whatever the cutover was like June 15th. And so we had this mad scramble like from June 10th to June 15th to clean those out and then get the data extracts out.
Okay. RC wanted to know, it sounds like you migrated acquisitions from Sierra. Would you do that again or not?
That's a really interesting question. So migrating acquisitions is not a standard part of the ALMA migration. And when we found that out, we were really weirded out by that. Because why wouldn't you keep your financial data? It seems kind of odd to just be like, poof, goodbye. So we did opt to do that. I think, it was very helpful to have all our vendors set up in there and to have, so all of the acquisitions data for print materials turned out well. The acquisitions records for electronic materials, if it was an ebook, it was fine. So if it's standalone, it's fine. The journals, the e-journals are much more complicated. And so I don't know really if it's more work to try and clean those up or if it would be more work to just create a new purchase order for that. So I think it was a double-edged sword. Some of it was really good to have and some of it's created more work. So I guess if you wanted to save money, I would say no. If you don't care about money, which sounds strange for any library, then go ahead and migrate it. It's probably going to be about the same amount of work.
Okay. Jesus wanted to know, how can you help in the communicator role and act effectively as a communicator if you may not understand all the technical terms or areas and you're not the administrator? Any thoughts on how to galvanize communications?
Well, so I, am an administrator, but I think I can talk to this a little bit because, nobody when we're moving from triple I and then to Ex Libris, all of the terms change. And it was really hard for us, and me, because I was supposed to be the primary communicator between Grinnell College and Ex Libris. It was very hard for me to communicate stuff that I'm like, I don't know the words to use to ask. So a lot of it, I use my foreign language experience because I, speak French, and sometimes, if I don't know something in French, how to say the actual word, I just describe it until somebody gets what I'm saying. So sometimes you just have to keep describing it until some light bulb clicks. That's probably my best advice on that.
Okay, thank you. Irina wants to know, is it difficult or possible to continue cleaning after you migrate?
So yeah, you're just doing cleanup in in Alma rather than in your legacy system.
And we have 2 questions here from Craig. He wanted to know how much time was allotted to your implementation process, like how many weeks or months. And then he also wanted to know if you could estimate your failure rate in the PTE process.
Okay. How many weeks or months? We had 5 months as per the contract from Ex Libris, and I think that's pretty standard. We kind of kept pushing back. We were always kind of like, can you give us support before? Because we thought that 6 months would be better than 5. They will put, Ex Libris, at least for us, will give you a little bit of support pre-implementation, but just not as much. So we did squeeze out a few extra weeks, just kind of asking them preliminary questions, but it was 5 months.
And he wanted to know about the PTE your PTE rate.
Actually, there's some duplication that was very easy to clean out. I don't know. Let's see. I don't really have a percentage, but we've got probably 1,000 and so everything did turn in that was supposed to be electronic did turn into electronic. We did have about 1,000 records that came in with null URLs, because those were some of the ones that we were trying to dedupe in Sierra and Serial solutions. And those, actually in trying to clean up the acquisitions data, we've been able to clean out tons of those. So we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone in that case.
Okay, and Colleen wanted to know, what about community zone records? Did you spend time editing before attaching your portfolio to them?
We try not to. As best as we've been able to see, there's not really a good way of editing community zone records ourselves, because anytime that there's an update, they just kind of get overlaid. So if we wanted to change the community zone record, we'd either have to just make it one of our own institutional zone records, or we just kind of leave it as is, and we've just decided to leave it as is. We're not that big of a staff.
Okay. I guess we have time for one more quick question. So anyone else who has any questions, please feel free to email Rebecca. Her email address is up on the screen right now. So last question is briefly, Cynthia wanted to know briefly, how did your Primo rollout go? Did you go to Primo also?
Yeah, so we went to Primo, and the Primo rollout was, well, one, I didn't have to do much about the configuration because we have a discovery layer, I don't know, fanatic in our library. So she was just like, I'll do it. So that was great. Have one of her is my other some advice. And everything that all comments I received about Primo from the faculty and staff outside of the library was good. And then pretty much everybody in the library uses Alma to search. So unlike Janet, who lost, when she was talking about Voyager's OPAC being lost, our staff didn't mind that. We didn't really use Sierra's OPAC to search, but external faculty and staff did. But I have not really heard any complaints about it, going away.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yep,
And
thank you.
yeah, so if anybody else has any questions, please email Rebecca with those questions. I'm going to go back to my slides.